Hello, everyone. I am Ben Flanagan with AL.com and the Birmingham News. I want to first say, even though this Q&A is virtual, it's just so wonderful to have Sidewalk back in theaters. So thank you to the festival for working so hard to make it happen in a safe way so that we can celebrate movies like Television Event, this amazing documentary that you just saw in the beautiful theater. And I want to introduce our esteemed panel here that is really only rivaled by the one that ABC put together in the wake of the premiere of The Day After back in 1983. That one led by the gentleman joining us now, former ABC anchor, member of the Television Hall of Fame and legendary broadcast journalist, Mr. Ted Koppel. Also here, the amazing director of The Day After and really the star of Television Event, Academy Award and an Emmy Award nominee, Nicholas Meyer. And we also have Director of Television Event, Jeff Daniels, and producer, Amanda Spain. So thank you all so much for being with us today. My first question is really for everyone here. Where were you on Sunday, November 20th, 1983, during ABC's original broadcast of The Day After? What do you remember about the airing, watching the movie for the first time, and any feeling or conversations that you had once it was over? And I'll start with Jeff.
Sure. I think I speak with much authority here because I was 5 years old at the time, and I was—
How old were you when it finished?
Yeah, 43 years old now, yes. So I was one of, I guess, the 100 million people who were watching with their families. And while my parents and family had the sense to put me to bed before that iconic bombing sequence, I got the point. All these people I was being introduced to were about to go through a very horrible, slow death. So it certainly affected me, even though I was hidden from most of the horrors. Yeah, that's where I was. I think I was asleep while the rest of the country was in conversation about this. That's my story.
Ted?
I was getting ready to do that conversation that parts of which you just saw in the film. And Nick, I know, will not be surprised, and I hope will not be offended when I say that the reason that ABC asked me to do that is they were absolutely terrified. They thought that they were going to be torn limb from limb for putting that movie on the air. I know it won't surprise you, Nick, to hear that they were afraid. And they hoped that by putting that viewpoint on the air after the movie, they would be able in some small measure to blunt the criticism. I don't think anybody ever thought that the movie would be as successful or as lasting a testament to the dangers of nuclear war as it turned out to be.
Nick, I have to assume that you have the most unique perspective in terms of where you were that night when this aired after having made it and gone through the process of finishing it. So that night, when it aired, where were you and what was going through your head?
Well, I don't know about the phrase most unique, but I was certainly there when it ran. I watched it with my then fiance. And I'm limiting myself to your question. When I sat there watching it, and I couldn't imagine anybody sitting through it. It was so painful that I turned to her at one point and I said, "Come on, if we weren't getting married, would you sit through this?" And she was just staring at the screen. I don't even remember what she said, but that was my experience of it. I know more stuff about the newscast and the discussion that happened afterwards, some of which is all explained by Jeff's terrific documentary, which told me so many things I never knew. I did know that the White House was very concerned about the movie And I had a friend, a Dr. Stephen Piachenik, who was on call with the State Department. He was a psychoanalyst whom I've known since we were very young. And he specialized in terrorist psychology. And he resigned from the State Department when Cyrus Vance admitted the Shah into the United States, saying, "You've no idea what you've done." And then when they took all the hostages, he would be interviewed on television. "Well, Dr. Piachenik, it's day 54. How do you think they're doing?" Etc. And he got called back to the State Department to watch a movie with the Joint Chiefs, which turned out to be my film. And David Gergen, who was Reagan's press secretary, said, now the president, who I think at that point had not seen the film, wanted to know what we were going to do about this movie, we meaning the White House and the Pentagon. And originally their notion was they were going to have to put someone on to chill out the country. And their first idea, and I don't know if Mr. Koppel knows this, was Jean Kirkpatrick.
Yes, she would have done it.
And I said, "Why didn't you do it? Why didn't you do it?" He goes, "Nick," he said, "I was working for them." So they got smart and put George Shultz on to talk to you instead and say, "No, Ted, this is not the way it's going to be."
Amanda, your recollection of when The Day After aired, or when it first popped into your head?
So I was also really young, and I was living in Dickinson, Texas, a very small Texas town, and I don't have any recollection of it. I do have a recollection of being very afraid of nuclear war and being prepared for it and having drills if it happened. But actually working with Jeff was the first time I really learned about it, and I really watched it, and I'm still now horrified by it still today. So
yeah, and Jeff and Amanda, when you set out to make this and ask these gentlemen, Nicholas Meyer, Ted Koppel, Ed Hume, ABC executives, and others to revisit the phenomenon that was The Day After, this historical moment in television that happened 4 decades ago, what was the response you initially got when you asked people, will you talk about this movie again?
I think that there was a bit of surprise at why I felt this was, I felt that this was a significant moment where I guess at the time I was making the film, the 2016 election was going on. And for me, I found that family members, friends, some were not necessarily talking to each other as much. I sensed the polarization of people just within my own sphere, and being reminded of The Day After, and that 100 million people saw this at the same time, and it created a push for them to speak with each other about the same thing because they'd gone through this emotional experience together. I just felt this is significant. So when I explained to people I was trying to interview how significant I felt this film was, they were at first, I think the response was surprise. I don't know if they necessarily remembered it being as big as it was, but as I got into it and as I started to try and analyze the film moment by moment and how something like The Day After could be made by a family-friendly network like ABC and then watched by 100 million people in the US alone, tens of millions internationally, I think the significance of that moment became more apparent. I actually had to do some research to show Ted Koppel that there were between 60 to 80 million people watching that panel discussion that he moderated afterwards, one of the largest audiences for a non-live news event. And so I found that quite surprising. And yeah, that was my experience.
By far the biggest audience we ever had, matter of fact. May I bring us to today for a moment?
Mm.
Sure.
even as what's going on in Afghanistan right now is underway. The one point that you barely hear made on television, and I've only seen it referenced a couple of times in some of the major newspapers, is the extraordinary danger that exists right next door to Afghanistan now. We are so worried about the danger of nuclear weapons in Iran. We are so concerned about the nuclear weapons that exist in Korea, in North Korea. Nobody talks about the fact that next door to Afghanistan is a country which has a very active and concerned number, I mean, tens of millions of people who are pro-Taliban, pro-Al-Qaeda, in a country that has over 100 nuclear warheads. We rarely hear that referenced at all. And I think when the ultimate history of all of this is told, we will find that the main reason that the United States remained in Afghanistan for 20 years was not so little girls could go to school. It was to avoid the danger of those nuclear weapons falling into the hands of some of these terrorist organizations.
Yes, for sure. And ABC executive Stu Samuels in the film, he said, when you put a show like this in someone's home, you're going to hurt people. You're going to make people distraught. It's a very dangerous prospect to put something like this on the air, and advertisers hate controversy. And he also said about viewers, if they have to avert their gaze, there's probably something wrong. And I just wonder, Nick and Ted, do you feel like the day after changed that outlook anyway for that network and other networks? Do you feel like that's an idea that still holds true in 2021?
Nick?
No, because the whole delivery system of stories and dramatic material has shifted with the creation of the internet and with streaming movies that are not as directly dependent on sponsors. They're dependent on subscribers. And so if you're not worried about Kellogg's cornflakes dropping out of your show, but you're worried about how many people subscribe to Netflix, that's just one umbrella organization within which you can pick and choose. Even like you preset the buttons on your radio station, what you want to hear, what you don't want to hear. I do think that Ted's comment a minute ago should not be just sort of, we heard it and then we gloss over it. The Pakistan thing and all that it implies, there's an implication that we're safer and better now than we were when two superpowers were eyeball to eyeball with their fingers on these buttons. That is not the case. The case is that we are worse off than we were because technology has made everything accessible to everyone. You can print out a gun with your printer. How long before you can print out a bomb with your printer, if that's not already happened? And there are many desperate people whose ideology has reinforced their desperation, or vice versa, who have possession of these terrible weapons. And Ted used the phrase a minute ago, when this history is written. And I wonder who will be alive to write it if people start pushing these buttons that aren't presumably responsible governments, and even that was a dicey proposition.
I think to that point, I think that's why this film is so important, and put this film, this documentary that puts that show in the spotlight. And everything that surrounded that show and that
Totally,
moment in
totally
history.
agree, because
And
people had forgotten that movie until this doc.
yeah, and forgotten that, I mean, there are whole generations who've grown up without that fear. Like I grew up with the fear of nuclear war. I grew up with this real belief that any minute a nuclear war could happen and the whole world would be gone. And I think that, to everyone's point, that should still be a fear. We should still live with that fear so that we don't let it happen. And I think that's what's so great about this documentary and the show that was on, in 83, is that that's the point, is that we have to really recognize that this is real. It's not just a TV show. It's not just a documentary. It could really happen. And that's what Nicholas did so well in The Day After, was really bring that point home, that it could happen to your town. And that literally, and what, some of the subjects say so well in the film, it's like, this is my town. These are my people. These are the people I love that could be destroyed by this thing if we don't really take this issue seriously.
I was quite fascinated with how, after decades of activism on the parts of people, including those who helped construct the original atomic bomb, all of that work to try and do just what Amanda's said, try and make the threats understood as quite a personal thing. This isn't something that some people in some room are talking about and trying to do, and this is for the military to make decisions on. This affects us directly and personally. And so I tried to show as much as I could the work that a lot of these activists had been doing decade upon decade, trying to make their own films and documentaries highlighting some of the protests that had blown up into the millions in 1982, just before The Day After came out. And Shout, the song by Tears for Fears that we adapted in the end, talks specifically about those protests that were going on. This is why I felt it was important to highlight the significance of The Day After. This was finally something that could touch people personally, so that they were able to understand on an individual level how nuclear war would affect them and their communities, so that the thought of using nuclear war as a political tool or as a threat would be seen as obscene. And I'm hoping that people can be reminded of that today, given the threat that Ted and Nicholas are talking about.
Also, I would just like to add that there were movies about nuclear war that had been made, but they were movies. You had to go see them. And as I, theorize, a lot of people who went to see them were sort of masochists who just, went there to absorb a kind of punishment, and it's sort of preaching to the choir. But because of network television, this movie was in your face, which is to say it was in your living room. You could, in theory, switch it off, and I'm sure there were people who did. But it was a different kind of access. And the fact that it was nothing more than a TV movie allowed it, I think, sometimes to sneak in the back door of people's collective or individual consciousness. It was just like, it's a TV movie. It's not like a feature where you have to find a babysitter and go out and really sort of commit to be punished. You could just be punished in your own home.
If I could just jump in for a moment, and let me preface what I'm going to say by emphasizing I'm a huge admirer of the film, and I'm a huge admirer of the documentary. But the film is very much a period piece. We live in a different age. And that doesn't mean it's a less dangerous age. If anything, as Nick and I began to discuss a little earlier, we live in a more dangerous age, because nuclear weapons now are in the hands of nations and organizations, potentially organizations that would have no qualms whatsoever about using them. But nuclear weapons are not the only truly dangerous weapons of our time. Cyber warfare has the potential to be almost as devastating in its impact on a nation, especially like ours. We are probably the most, when I say we, I mean the United States, is probably the most vulnerable nation to cyber warfare of any nation in the world, because we depend so much on cyber. So the dangers of 40 years ago are not the same dangers that we confront today. And the nuclear threat is not the same nuclear threat that we confronted when it was just us and the Soviet Union. And yes, the Chinese had it, and the Israelis had it, and the French had it, and the British had it. But by and large, it was in the hands of, quotation marks, responsible parties. That's no longer the case.
You remember Tom Lehrer had that song,
I do.
Who's Next? We got the bomb, but that was good because we're for peace and brotherhood. Then Russia got the bomb, but that's okay because the balance of power is maintained that way.
Yeah.
And it goes on for everybody else getting the bomb.
Yeah.
I feel like Ted just gave us the sequel to Nicholas. You have to start working on this next film that can scare everybody about that.
Well, it's interesting that you say this because, again, talking about how things have changed, I have received over the past, I don't know, 10, maybe 15 years, letters and communications from scientists around the world asking, imploring that I remake the film. And I have gone to these super streamers, these Netflix places, and proposed an updated version of this, and been uniformly turned down. They are afraid of something I suspect very similar to what happened to the ABC folks. They don't want to be the center of any kind of a controversial attention, or at least be lost in the shuffle if they were amongst a million other broadcasts. They can't imagine, more to the point, that anything like 100 million viewers would collect themselves for what wouldn't be appointment television anyway. It would be, you know, what do you feel like watching? Do you want to take in the day after? So the chances of it being remade, let alone updated with references to the cyber catastrophe that is currently hanging over our heads, I would judge to be remote. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before.
And since we're pretty much almost out of time, I'll wrap with this. Jeff, you said that the day after, while certainly bleak in subject matter and full of disturbing imagery, the film gave you a lot of hope because it was able to bring people together in a unique way. And you said that it's unfortunate that we're missing out on this opportunity where we can bring people together at the same time to connect emotionally with an otherwise indigestible subject like nuclear war, especially now when people are so divided politically, to talk about global issues with such urgency. And you said that this documentary is a reminder that we can still do that. And I just wonder, as we close, do you still think that film and television are capable of inspiring that? And this goes to Jeff first, and if anybody else has anything to say about that.
Certainly, and I'd love to hear what Amanda thinks about this, given her work as a producer in the industry. We're always looking for ways for stories and different forms of storytelling to try and inspire people on an emotional level and to get them to take their emotional understanding of vast global issues seriously, and to weigh that equally to other ways of considering these subjects as they put in their votes. And I think that, yeah, I mean, I feel that this is one example of a unique period in our communications history where more people than ever before or since were watching network television, 3, 4 channels that they had to choose from, so that you're able to get 100 million people watching the same thing at the same time. This moment has passed, and I feel that I felt that it was incredibly important to remind Americans of this, or to introduce younger Americans that when the conditions are right, we can come together and talk. We don't need to agree with each other. We need to talk with each other about.
But let me ask you, we all seem to be living in bunkers now. How do you get past this sort of, we either take walks with earbuds in our ears, I don't, but you know, I see people doing this. We sit at home and watch our own screens and tune to that particular demographic, some of which I'm sure is crazy as all get out. And how do you have what we always used to refer to as the water cooler conversation? We can't, you know, with COVID, it's compounded the problem created by the internet. And to it, the congregation is different. I know as an artist, I firmly believe that drama is a shared experience. Art is with the exception of reading, I think, theater, opera, ballet, movies, to sit and have a collective experience that is simultaneously individual and personal, but is ultimately inseparable from the collective experience. That's a loss. If that's going to be a permanent loss, that's bad for human beings, in my opinion.
I think about this a lot. I think this
How you know.
Look, television news also, Nick, used to be a shared experience.
Yeah.
Millions of people gathered in front of their flickering altar every night to watch Uncle Walter or Huntley Brinkley or Frank Reynolds. And there was a shared experience there too, and a commonality of reaction to what was being broadcast. The assumption was not everybody liked the newscasters in those days. That wasn't the point. But there was a fundamental level of trust, a fundamental acceptance of the notion that those men, and mostly men, there weren't that many women on television news in those days, but that those people were fundamentally trustworthy and reliable. That doesn't exist anymore.
But I would say that on a big, like for me, I think, and all of us probably on here right now, fundamentally probably do believe in the power of art and filmmaking and storytelling. I know I do. And I wouldn't do this if I didn't. And you know, it's too hard in the documentary community to get things done. So if I didn't truly believe that movies mattered and that movies could still move people, movements, shape our world in a better way, I just think having people see other people's stories makes people more empathetic and more have the ability to connect and relate to people in a way that they might not if they don't get to see their stories. And that's why documentary to me is so important, because it introduces people to worlds they might not ever get to see otherwise, real worlds that they might not ever get to see otherwise. And like this film for me, it introduced me to a moment that I might have lived in, but I had no idea the complexity of that moment in time and the moment that still exists. And I think that's what's so great about filmmaking and documentaries and artists, is that we really hope to change the world for the better. And sometimes when you're lucky, 100 million people show up to help you do it.
And today what we have is an opportunity for people to experience that empathy in the shared experience of a movie theater, or with an independent film festival that's allowed to bring people together safely during these times. So I'm so grateful for everyone's in the audience of the Alabama Theater and the Lyric Theater coming together and supporting the Sidewalk Film Festival, because the work that we all do here comes together in this moment. And I hope that you're all able to have conversations with yourselves, with your friends and family online about this film and all the other films that you've seen, because this is the whole point of why we do the work that we do. And we really appreciate your support.
Well, look, I want to thank all of y'all for joining us tonight. The film is outstanding, and I know that we're thrilled to share it and really celebrate it here at Sidewalk. And so Ted Koppel, Nicholas Meyer, Jeff Daniels, Amanda Spain, this really was an honor to have all of you. So thank you so much.